It's like you said, just a very taboo conversation that no one wants to have.
People don't know how to talk about sex. How are you supposed to learn in that environment?
In the media, we're always hearing about celebrities who are harming people in sexual ways. Politicians are just constantly hearing about negative sexual experiences that people have. But there's not a lot of talk about how to heal that, how to deal with it, how to pause.
I know that it can be good. I know that it can feel good and it can be rewarding. And I know that it can come without all the drama.
Nature is so salacious. Everything's having sex everywhere, all around you.
Not saying everyone has sex and that we all should be having sex, but more so, we all have that energy in us and how we decide to exude that energy is that freedom part of it.
My first memory when it comes to any education around sex, like explicitly, came from the church.
You learn like, yeah, you should wait for you to be married.
Because I also grew up in the South, so it's like very Christian, church-minded people, and that bled into everything.
It always just never really added up for me.
The church is very, very loud about sex does not come before marriage. Sex is between a man and a woman, and sex is for the purpose of creating a child, which none of that ever resonated with me.
I do see where they were trying to just protect us in a way, but I think it was like overprotective because then you had the whole, the scary STDs and shit.
If you do touch each other, you will get chlamydia and die.
I remember being maybe like 12. There was this lady and she was talking to us about how to be good Christians. The story she shared, I have never forgotten. I don't even know if it's true, but she said that there was a young lady. She implied that the young lady had given a boy head. And she said that the lady ends up in the hospital with this like abscess in her mouth. When they popped whatever the abscess was, she had crabs in her mouth.
Part of my life is like learning how to cover up was a big thing. I got my chest really early. I got my chest at like 9. That type of attention really like switched like my understanding of my body and like not just sex itself, but like sexualization.
I first found out what sex was like in the second grade. Some girl I was friends with was like, "Oh my God, do you know what sex is?" I said, "No, what is it?" And she was like, "It's when the penis goes in the vagina." And I was like, "Oh, that's crazy."
I think my first experience with like learning about what sex was like in elementary school, probably by my classmates. I just wanted to feel like involved. So then I would go home and like research these words and would process them on my own.
I think my first introduction to sex was finding porn DVDs.
I mean, I was exposed to porn at an early age. I was like 6. So from there, I had spent like 4 or 5 years just watching porn. It wasn't spoken about.
I remember I was at my cousin's house once. It's probably like closer to middle school. She was saying something about like a boy eating her out. And I was like, she was like, it was so good, it felt so nice. And I'm just like, what felt so good? What felt so good? Please explain it to me. Like, and they're like, no, you're too young, which I was. Like, I definitely was. And then when I looked it up online, I think I got dinner recommendations, because eating out, right?
When I was a kid, my mom loved watching Sex and the City, and I would watch it as well, even though I should not have been watching that at a young age, because I believe I was like, I might have still been in kindergarten, honestly. So yeah, that was my first introduction to sex being talked about.
I remember watching the movie and it was like Blade Trinity. He was like, "I'm trying to get laid." And then I was like, I asked my dad, I was like, "Dad, what does getting laid mean?" He said, "Don't worry about that shit." Like
After that, it just kind of always became a question, but I couldn't ask anyone in my family, so I just would listen.
I didn't fully know what porn was, that there was something dedicated purely to sex, but I knew there were sex scenes, and I would be like, oh, I want to see this sex scene.
I would just see like pictures come up and I'd be like, what is that? What's going on here? Why do I feel like this? Like at 6 years old.
There's different levels of like ages where you discover your body. And then at some point you discover there's a part of your body that feels really, really good.
Maybe like about 10 or 11, I probably figured out what masturbation was.
Maybe around like age 11, 12. I didn't have a laptop or anything, so we had like an actual desk computer type thing. So I would like go and I would look up videos on YouTube, like sex or like sex scenes, and I would like record it on my phone. And then I would go to my room and watch it and hump my pillow.
My first time masturbating, I was a preteen, and I realized when I was watching porn, why do the women react like that when they put something that vibrates down there? And lucky me, I had a vibrator for like my Bell's palsy. One night I just tried it, and it was like my soul levitated out of my fucking body. Like it was like that SpongeBob meme. I just loved doing it after that, of course.
I think during that time was when, I don't know if you maybe call it like cognitive dissonance, or like I had that realization that like, oh, okay, this feels really good, but I can't talk about it, or like I don't have safe spaces to really talk about it.
I don't think I ever told anyone. I didn't think anyone else was doing it. I'm just copying someone on TV, so I don't think it's a thing. I didn't even know it's called masturbation. So I'm like, okay, definitely one of those things where like don't get caught. Like you can't get caught doing this.
Rue, dinner's ready.
Okay.
Shortly after I discovered masturbation, my mom caught me masturbating and didn't know how to fucking react because she didn't know how to talk about sex. She barges in my room and she's like, what are you doing? Just being funny. Didn't realize, didn't think she was really walking on me doing shit. Then she comes up and she flings the fucking covers back. And then she just started screaming. And she was just like, you shouldn't be, why are you doing that? You shouldn't be doing that. As she's slowly like backing out of my room, and then she slams the door and runs away. I didn't understand it. It's like, what does that mean?
Right after I'd be like, oh, I am disgusting. Like I definitely remember feeling like that. And then I remember when like we would kind of start talking about masturbation, like with my friends. One of my friends, she basically was open that she masturbated. I was too, but I remember another friend kind of like judging her for it, and me kind of feeling like, oh, okay. In that moment, that kind of reinforcing that feeling of shame.
My mom always said, just don't bring no babies in the house. That's what she used to say, don't bring no babies in the house. And I mean, that was kind of an abstinence for me.
My mom, for her, it was just don't have sex. Really? Don't get pregnant.
I feel like I really didn't even have that kind of like sex conversation with my parents or anything where, you know, they call it the birds and the bees. So I kind of still was out there on my own, besides the fact like maybe being shamed by my parents for me being a bisexual woman.
You gonna tell your mom?
Being gay isn't something Black people love to talk about.
I will never forget the day gay marriage was legalized in America. We were in church, I think that following Sunday. I remember the pastor preaching like, they're trying to take our children, this is bad. Like, we need to bring our children closer to God, stop leaving them at home. Lots of just messaging around like no bodily autonomy, no autonomy in general. Can't really think for yourself.
What I learned from my parents was kind of the bare bones essentials of just like, you know, this is a penis, this is a vagina, this is how they work. Then I got taught it in school, 10 years old, and she walked us through basically the same information, just like physically, this is sex, watch out for babies, wear a condom.
I just remember like traumatic shit that my gym teacher told us. She was like, shouldn't be having sex, these boys don't love you, they will lie to you in your face and they will get you pregnant.
And then I remember in 5th grade, they separated us and it was the girls and boys and we had to talk.
In South Carolina, it was abstinence only. So it was don't get pregnant, don't have sex. That's it.
Sex will ruin your life forever.
No questions. Okay?
My sex ed teacher, I love her to bits and pieces, but I do vividly remember her telling us to just not have sex.
I had like a very, very small period of health where you kind of just were told, oh, a man should wear a condom. And then that was kind of just like the end of the conversation. So honestly, I feel like most of my education was me deciding to go out on my own.
Being young, I saw so much about sex in the media, but the women in my life, the people in my life, weren't talking about it. It was strange for me to deal with those two different worlds.
Socially, I think it's a little bit different, a lot of in your face sexual marketing, those two things in tandem, but not a lot of conversations about like what sexuality was.
The real sexual education I got was from women on the internet who were comfortable sharing their experiences. My mom never told me what a yeast infection was, but I learned what it actually was through this woman on the internet. Her name is Eileen.
You need to be comfortable with who you are on the most intimate level.
Me starting to find pages like Shambudrum.
When you pour into this space, it gives back in every single facet.
All these people, I'm like, oh, this is nothing to feel shame about.
One of the first feelings I have had around sex was just shame, and that I should feel ashamed for just like having the body that I had because I was like tempting men.
You know, I think in our society, we deal with a lot of repression, and that repression can be heavy.
Wrapping my mind around like having a body in combination with like being a part of a world that has like a lot of history around my body, even though I just got here.
Religion, all that, it's just like you feel cornered to fit in a certain mold, and not everyone fits in that mold. And then you dig deeper and it's like, we Black people.
While Blackness is not homogenous, we're not a monolith, I think being someone that's, you know, Southern born, Southern raised, there's a lot more of a particular expectation for how you're supposed to perform your masculinity and by proxy your sexuality. And it's very strict.
As a Black person, unfortunately, like our people are already masculinized, our people are already kind of robbed from slavery, like of a gendered experience. They expect us to all be stoic and not have like deep emotions or feel pain.
I feel like sex was also kind of like thrust upon me as just like a Black child and like a Black girl especially, who is supposed to be like sexy and who's not. I'm sexy, but like white girls are cute. Recognizing the like deviance in like sexiness.
One of my older sisters who I think leaned on a little bit more of the conservative side sexually, and my mom definitely on the conservative side sexually, like, you know, promiscuity, you know, like you weren't gonna be fast, you weren't gonna do anything like that. But like with my friends, they were a lot more sexually experienced than I was, and being in that environment, I just felt like I was almost falling behind, and I was like, okay, you know, I'm ready, you know. Yeah. I just need this to happen.
I remember it being like a big deal to me.
At the time, I had felt like I was behind.
There was a lot of pressure back then to have sex. TV, you seeing all these different people like having sex or whatever. I'm like, they're not getting married.
It was a lot self-guided, figuring things out and getting out of that mentality that I'm entitled to a particular experience because like the media, Disney and like TV shows and like, this is what it's like to be a teen, and teens are like making out and hooking up and this is very normal, and it wasn't happening. It's like, am I missing out? Am I living, you know, my childhood wrong? What's wrong with me? And then realizing there's nothing wrong with you. Life and you know, fiction are very, very, are worlds apart, and you can't compare yourself to that, especially if you're like, you know, a Black kid taking in a lot of like wider media. It's not always like a reflection of what you're really living.
Closer to having sex, it's kind of like a crossover thing. Like when someone doesn't have their period, sometimes they don't understand things, and then you have your period, so now you can talk to people about it more. So with that, it wasn't really shame, but like maybe the friends that did not start or who still weren't having sex or messing around with people, it would be shameful of like, okay, I can't tell you about this because you're most likely gonna judge me or you don't get it, so now I have to like go talk to the people that already are doing it.
It was, I think, late high school, I hadn't had penetrative sex. It was just oral sex. My first time actually having penetrative sex.
He ended up like still talking to other people while entertaining me. In some ways, it gave me like a negative experience when it came to sex.
I just had a whole experience that was wrong.
In my mind, I was like, okay, this is sex and this is supposed to feel good. And it didn't feel good. Pleasure wasn't really like in my mind.
Subsequent experiences sexually were often like just disappointing.
You need to begin with a movement, which is what Black Power and the Civil Rights Movement was. Then, immediately within it, you are going to get those people whose differences are not being articulated, which is, right, us. So then there is immediately another step.
All of my friends were, for the most part, straight, or if I did have like a queer friend, it was usually a guy. So everyone was talking about men. Everything was men, men, men. As I grew into myself, I still was figuring out like, well, I don't think about men nearly as much as these other people do.
Anytime I would talk to boys, like my skin would be crawling. I said, oh, I have to get away. And I just thought that was like, oh, you know, you're scared of like intimacy, or, you know, like when you find the right one, it'll go away.
I was always really close to like my girlfriends, like in school.
And even when I like left my mom's church and I was like, okay, I'm gonna go find my own church, and I found more of a modern church, and I enjoyed it at the times that I was there, but it always never really sat well with me because it would always be like man and woman, and like internally it never felt right.
But I saw this girl online for a while, and I didn't feel like I wanted to rip my skin off. So I said, oh, this is what it's supposed to be like.
Slowly I realized, oh, I think I might actually be a lesbian.
That kind of like changed the game for me as far as like sex and sexuality. So I actually ended up losing my virginity when I was 20 to a girl. So that was the beginnings of my journey.
From a very young age, I was aware of my sexuality, even though I wasn't sexual or even thinking about things that way. I could definitely see that I was attracted to both girls and boys, and it always stayed that way.
Well, I definitely grew up around people that weren't outwardly gay. I think I just learned to adapt to like being attracted to boys, and I was. And I had crushes on boys all through high school. My first real kiss was a girl. We taught each other how to make out in the stairwell in like 10th grade. But other than that, I just always thought I was gonna marry a boy. Like I wanted a traditional life of me marrying a man and having children. And it wasn't until like college that I realized like I could know something else.
I did not realize that I was queer until 2 years ago. So it is a very new revelation. And I think the reason for that was I was taught if you were gay, you was going to hell. It got to the point where I didn't even necessarily look at my own body until I was a junior in college. I definitely never looked at women. Anytime I was ever in a situation with someone where I now realize I was experiencing attraction, but I would just say like there's certain women who make me feel weird, and I would stay away from them.
I would say I had to work through a lot of religious trauma. And one of the best things my therapist ever did, she asked me to create my own religion. And she asked me to like describe like what it's like, what does it feel like living underneath that religion. And for me, it was a lot of autonomy.
I am in the process of healing my relationship to sex.
I think I held a lot of like shame when I first was like, you know, coming out. I just felt like I was really late into the game. Everyone I knew that was queer came out when they was young, or knew when they were young. They like, I had a crush on this actress, this whoever, you know? So coming out at 20, even though still young as hell, I just felt like I was behind.
Coming into queerness late, it can be embarrassing to have to like ask questions. You're encountering women who are just going to perceive you as someone else who's queer, and feeling like you have to disclose, hey, I've never done this before, and being afraid of the shame or like being rejected because of it.
I was told by everyone that I should be with a man, and I would say there's more of a straight agenda than there is a gay agenda. I internalized so much of that, and I wanted to be straight. I think I was in denial for such a long time.
I think I could have used more information about queerness, just like gender expansiveness and bisexuality, because as a kid, I could only conceive myself as either being gay or straight. It was just not accessible. There were not queer people around me to kind of tell me how you could age and grow old with people this way and like alternative ways.
I say all the time, I'm gonna be a lesbian. I'm like any day now, it's gonna kick in. I'm fighting that demon that is patriarchy every single day.
Even when my sister came out as gay, I was like, well, I'm not gay. Just because it's like, it didn't really feel like an option for me. Not even that I felt like ashamed to be gay, but it just didn't feel like a choice you could make.
Coming to terms that your life might be different than what you imagined was like the part of heteronormativity I had to work on, is like letting go of that idea of having a traditional life and like having to tell people that you don't have a traditional life.
Ma, I'm gay.
I don't even know if I necessarily shared it with other people more than they just like found out, because I wasn't hiding anything. People gave their opinions, but it's like already it is what it is, and your opinion is not gonna change my sexuality. So
Like, I've never felt shame or guilt for being queer. I've always been like really curious about my sexuality and like the feelings that I have.
I never thought of like, what is another way that people can have sex? It was just like what I seen. So, and I feel like having like queer sex, non like heteronormative sex has definitely opened the door of like what sex is.